everyone, it's Jack with the Cardboard Herald, where we talk to creative gamers and game creators. Today is no exception. I have the Catacombs master himself, Aron West of Elzra Games, is on today's podcast. And if you listen to our Dice Tower Con wrap-up episode, you may have heard a little mini interview that we had with Aron at that time, but we didn't get to go into the depths of the Catacombs that we do on today's episode. And I mean, we go into it. We talk about the story, the capabilities of board games and storytelling, his own story, developing Catacombs with friends, and then bringing the company forward, how he had ideas to expand and evolve, and ideas for the future on what the Catacombs brand could be. I was fascinated talking with Aron, and this is one of my favorite episodes for one of the most interesting games out there. If you haven't played Catacombs, it is a dexterity-based dungeon crawl game. You got your dungeon master type person, you got the heroes fighting against them, and you are flicking little discs with dexterity and precision in order to deal damage to one another. But it is not so simple. You actually have skills and abilities and strategy involved, but it's not so over the top that it's impenetrable to new players. There is a skill element to playing the game, but it's also accessible and forgiving enough that it is a fun thing to sit down with new players and just have an awesome time flicking discs around at each other. And coincidentally, if you don't like dungeon crawl games, well, there's other types of games. There's Catacombs and Castles, which is a skirmish type game where you have up to 4-on-4. That's the game that I played for the first time at Dice Tower Con, and it blew me away. In particular, the artwork by Kwanchai Moriya, just it was unfathomably interesting. Like it set itself apart visually and in mechanics wise from any other game I played at that entire convention. So it was one of the show's most interesting games that I got to play. And they just had a successful Kickstarter for Catacombs Conquest for a smaller version of Catacombs that's meant to be played with lower player counts. I'm really excited for what the company has in the future, and really, I was just excited to talk with Aron. He seems like a really cool dude, very introspective, smart, and kind. He was very open about anything that I wanted to ask about. He was very willing and professional to answer every single question that I threw at him. A very cool dude. Plus, he had Aragorn as his avatar on Skype. So the guy has to be pretty rad to have some Lord of the Rings swag going on there. So without further ado, here is Aron West of Elzra Games, the Catacombs master himself.
I'm going to be driving, so I want to stretch a bit before, being locked in position in the car. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. Not just stretching, but the mental fortitude that you'll need for yet another convention. You need that yoga.
You sure do, yeah. So it's one thing that does help keep me sane. That's for sure.
Yeah, when I was in Florida, actually, when I first met you at Dice Tower Con. I'm a real avid runner, and even though it was crazy hot there and I could have been playing board games, like every day I had to clear my mind and hit the gym and go for a run just to kind of decompress from the sheer amount of board game overload that I was getting.
We're fortunate around here. We've got some nice trails, so I do some trail running when I have the opportunity to get away and explore that, and of course just straight hiking. That was quite nice the other day. I was able to get a nice 2-hour hike in.
I think that is a great place to start. So,
and we're already talking.
We're already talking. We're in the middle of it, man.
We're already rolling here, right?
This is organic as it gets.
You bet.
Aron West of Elzra Games, welcome to the Cardboard Herald.
Thank you very much.
I have no context whatsoever for the East Coast of Canada. Where am I actually talking to you at right now?
Well, I'm at my office. I'm 1 hour west of Toronto. That's Eastern Standard Time, in the city of Hamilton, Ontario, and that was an amalgamation of several smaller towns. So it's technically the town of Dundas, which is now part of Hamilton.
Is that where you grew up?
No, I was born in England.
Oh, okay. Okay, so what brought you to the North America?
I think it was just a parental decision at the time. They said, yeah, we're going to do something new, do something different. And so I went with them and have lived in Toronto, lived in Hamilton, in Southern Ontario.
Oh, that's fascinating. How old were you when you came over?
I was probably about 10 or 11, something like that, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I've talked with a few people who moved at a relatively young age to either the States or Canada, and just that incredible shift of cultures. And of course, there's commonalities, but that must have been pretty defining for you for a long time, that you were the British kid in school.
Well, I was the kid with the accent, that's for sure.
Yeah, I imagine there's no escaping that.
Yeah, no. And of course, I was also the kid where, it was in syndication for so long, like Aron West, Adam West. I was always Batman too, right? So it's kind of Batman with a British accent.
Right. It's funny. I was born overseas, and my dad worked for the federal government, and we lived for a long time in New Delhi, India. And so a lot of my media that I was getting was either French or British, because there were large British populations over in Southeast Asia at the time still. And so
Sure.
when I came to the U.S., I had no, I guess, context for the things that my peers were into, X-Men and Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles and all that kind of stuff. For me, it was all Asterix the Gaul and Tintin comics, anything that I could get my hands on that was the more European variety of things. And so moving to the big city in Alaska, no one had any context for what the hell I was into when I first got over here.
So there wasn't a Tintin in Alaska then?
Oh, there was, but Tintin isn't. That's some weird import comic that Americans, until recently, probably with the Peter Jackson Spielberg movie, didn't have a lot of context for.
I had some Tintin recognition when I was growing up in Ontario with the books and the libraries and everything. I read them.
Well, personally, I didn't have the same experience, but we are not here to talk about Tintin. We're here to talk about board games. Because you design board games. You design and produce and publish board games. You kind of do it all.
We do it all.
Is that something that is born out of your childhood? Were you playing games as a kid? Or is this something that you came into as an adult?
No, I grew up playing games. Not religiously, maybe, but we had Monopoly and Stratego and Uno and games of that kind, the more commercial games. And I suppose now I think about it, ones like Gambler and Operation and Waterworks and all those sorts of ones. And we did make modifications to them at times, invent new rules and sometimes new systems and things like that. I remember one time I made an outer track for Monopoly that had like more elaborate buildings and things like that you could get. I think one of them was a spaceport, for example.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that was the best square in this game, was the spaceport. And there was like a track that you could go down into the middle as well, and it kind of like crisscrossed, and it took Monopoly into a whole new direction of aimless hours of nobody being able to determine a winner. So, but anyway, it was part of the evolution, and I did spend some time with some of the Games Workshop stuff as well. I didn't ever get into really collecting sort of objects, games, things like that, but I did have friends who liked to do that, liked to paint them, enjoyed that part of it, and they were looking for people basically to play with. And okay, well, you'd be these characters over here, and I would explore that system. It didn't do very much with Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. I'd heard about it and knew people that played it, but I didn't explore that too much. I did play some of the role-playing games once or twice, maybe, but yeah, that's sort of about the extent of it, I would say.
So what was the era or the time in your life, or even the specific game that kind of opened up gaming to you, to this modern tabletop gaming hobby that we're all so immersed in now?
Yeah, we're all so immersed, that's right. I would say it was probably back in maybe the early 2000s, maybe something like that. Again, a group of friends, they started to buy some of those games. One of them that jumps to mind was the first edition of Game of Thrones, for example. This was before Game of Thrones was popular. Nobody really heard about it. It was just some book. When we were playing the game, for example, we weren't really even interested in so much the source material of it. It was just, okay, it was a fantasy novel that was out there. None of us had read it at the time, but it was this early Fantasy Flight game that had been put out, and it sort of went from there. Sort of scratched that area control itch, if you like, and then there was some of the Euro type games that started to be released, and in particular ones like Kalis, for example, which really crystallized a lot of the nascent ideas around worker placement games. And I think really what happened is that when we were playing these games in this group, we started to identify areas where we thought that we could improve on them, not in an arrogant fashion, but just, wouldn't it be a little better if he had taken things, say, in this direction? What about this idea? What was he really thinking when he designed, or he or she designed things this way? And so it got to a point where we started to say, well, let's maybe do this. This was 2008. And we started to have these conversations, and it kind of got down to just the three of us, myself, Ryan Amos, and Mark Kelsey, who I'm play games with periodically, and I'm still very much in contact with. And we said, well, let's do something. And we started to look at some different possibilities, some different ideas, and it grew organically into this concept of, well, let's do something with dexterity. And, when people meet with me, they say, well, had you heard of things like crokinole? And we'd never even heard of that. So we didn't even know what crokinole was. So
that's insane to me.
And I'm like, well, there's another game that kind of has these little discs, and this, I never even heard of that before. That's interesting. And it was only actually, just as an aside, a couple of years ago that I even learned about carom, which I'm assuming you would be familiar with, given your time that you spent over in India, for example.
Yeah.
So again, I'd not heard of that either, and I'd met a gentleman of South Asian extraction originally at a convention. He said, "Oh, that's kind of like carom," and I said, "What? What's that?" So opportunities to learn always in life. But anyway, back to 2008, we had this thing codenamed Nudgin' Quest, because of course you nudge your discs, right? So it's nudge instead of dungeon, nudgin. That was the...
Oh, you must have thought you were so clever.
That wasn't me, I don't think. We had to call it something, so I don't know. That's where it came from. And but ultimately, we decided that we would call it Catacombs, and we looked around, and there didn't seem to be an awful lot of games out there that had that name. So we thought, okay, yeah, let's go with that, and that was where the process really started.
There's a certain innocence that I look back on my own board game playing, and I'm sure a lot of people do when they look back on that one core group that would dive into a specific game or a handful of games. At this point, in my own collection. I have tons of games at my disposal, and I rotate through them. And then I have other friends who have a ton of games on top of that. And I miss the intimacy that came from playing one game over and over, or a handful of games, and really exploring them to the point where you can start deciding, well, wouldn't it have been cool if, just
Exactly.
as you guys ended up doing. Certainly, Catacombs has taken over the majority of your board gaming life at this point. But do you ever get to really dive into other designs in that repetitive way anymore? Or is that something you look back on fondly as something that you don't get to do but you miss?
I think somewhat, yes. I meet up with my friends fairly regularly, and Ryan is the collector of our group, and indeed some of the Kickstarter campaigns that we support, I give the games to him so that he can kind of add them to the library in the sense. And so, yeah, there's some of them that we tend to play more than others, and we haven't maybe gotten quite to the number of plays that some of those so-called original ones that we still periodically get out.
Right.
We haven't quite gotten to that point, but we've logged quite a number of plays, and they sometimes play a lot more than I do as well, so they'll log more of them than me. Now,
I do want to kind of frame this period of life in you, because you're also an entrepreneur. You become the publisher of your own game. So what were you doing before Catacombs came to life? What was your career?
I was involved with software development, and I just got into that, just self-taught. My degree originally was in philosophy, but I found I had some aptitude when it came to programming, and got involved with different languages and different entrepreneurial opportunities. But I got to a point with it where I felt that I was enjoying working on the game publishing side of things more. I'd been working on a multi-year IT project that related to radiology systems, and it wound up, and I decided, well, here's an opportunity here to perhaps focus on this board game / tabletop game side of things instead, and just an opportunity to flex a different part of the brain and be able to come to a job every day where you're getting to be very, very creative, which is has its own amazing rewards, and not, of course, just from a selfish perspective for me, but also for the people that clearly are enjoying the product, which is great. When you see some kids playing with a game and they really enjoy it, that's it's got a lot more meaning to it in a sense.
Right. Did the idea for publishing games and designing games as a career, did that come first, and then Catacombs was the consequence of that, or was it the other way around, that Catacombs was starting to become a thing and then you decided this is something that I could take and actually try and make a go of it?
Yeah, I would say it was the latter. It really just sort of crowded everything else out. I just got to a point where I could, like I said, wrap up that previous project, and I could really focus on this full time. And my two co-designers that helped me with first and second edition, they were okay with stepping back from that. They wanted to achieve certain things for themselves personally, which they felt that they had satisfied, and they were interested in moving on to other interests of theirs. But we always thank them for their contributions, and we're still very much actively involved with each other's lives. And indeed, the Catacombs Monster Pit card game, for example, was designed by Ryan, and I'm going to be publishing it for him. So he came up with the original concept, and we've been working on it now for the last 2 years, and it'll be released. And so this is again something that he wanted to do that was different, and that I was able to help him to get out there.
What was the reaction of people close to you at the time? Of course, I imagine that Ryan and Mark, they were totally on board and supportive, but I imagine there are also some people who you tell, oh, I'm going to stop doing software development and I'm going to start making board games for a living, who have a heart attack. Like, what? That you're going to make board games? Is that, a viable career? Who actually has any success? Is that going to be some way of supporting yourself going forward? Or was everyone, for the most part, really supportive of the idea?
Very supportive. I think they know that the kind of person that I am, tend to be very persistent, and exercise that perseverance with whatever I do. So they didn't have any major concerns about that. They basically said, well, if this is what you want to do, then that's fine. And I've also been, in a lot of ways, free to wander, because I'm not married. I don't have any dependents, so I have that opportunity to chart these different courses.
I want to talk more about the actual development and the ultimate release of Catacombs First Edition, but for those who are listening here that don't have context for Catacombs, because it's so unlike any other game or most other games that you'd pick up, what's your sales pitch for someone who walks up to you at Gen Con, say, and says, "Oh, what's this?"
It's the industry's leading fantasy dexterity dungeon crawl. That's about as short as you can get it.
And it's a mouthful.
Yeah, so that mouthful tells you that you've got a fantasy theme, but it's accessible. There's no, sort of blood and guts, so to speak. It's accessible, family friendly, and that is what you are doing. You're taking your disc that represents your hero, and you're advancing through the different rooms in the dungeon with the ultimate objective of confronting the Catacomb Lord. That's what fundamentally it's all about. Then, of course, it gets more into some of the more advanced features that the game offers, because you can treat it as a beer and pretzels kind of game, where it's we're just flicking some discs and having some fun, right over to, oh, well, I want to tell a story, and this is what the heroes are doing, and they're in this particular room, there's this, and that relates to such and such, and oh, and by the way, you've only got these particular resources to use, so plan carefully, and this is kind of a bit of a puzzle. Well, if you go over here and over there. So it's all, you can really take it in different directions in terms of how you want to approach it. And we encourage that because it's based on dexterity skill. If you've got a bunch of people that are that haven't necessarily practiced at it, well, just let them have fun with it. Don't be too picky about what happens. Other people that are want to be more sophisticated, spend more time with it. That's your choice.
So as the three of you, the three musketeers here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Three musketeers.
Aron, Ryan, and Mark are developing Catacombs, a game that is unlike anything that was currently on the market. Was there a particular aha moment where you were able to solve an issue that you were trying to overcome, or anything that was in particular difficult about the development that took a significant period of time to really come to what the finished product was?
I would say it was a whole series of difficult problems, because we didn't have any real context on how to do it. We literally researched it from scratch, how to put it all together, how to find a contract manufacturer that was going to be able to take this idea and bring it to light. Then, of course, there was all of the development, how the game ultimately unfolded. There were things, for example, that we removed that we felt would ultimately complicate it too much. So yeah, there was a lot of those kinds of challenges, and we weren't necessarily at that time doing it full time. So it was every week we would get together and reconvene and sort of bring the issues to the table as to what we'd have to do to conquer the next hurdle, so to speak.
Were you guys unanimously all still believing in the project throughout the entire duration of the development, or were there any periods where you, or speaking for Mark or Ryan, that any of you felt like maybe this won't work, or maybe this won't be the game that we want it to be?
I think we were confident that we could finish it and that we could publish something. I think in a sort of somewhat typical Canadian way, we maybe felt that we would just have like a pallet of these things in the basement somewhere, and every year for Christmas, someone would get a copy of Catacombs for the next decade or so, which of course was not what happened in the slightest. But I think generally for that first release, everyone was very much on board with it and was enjoying the process. And because of my entrepreneurial background, I tended to have a bit more flexibility to be able to put in some of the time during business hours that was required.
Okay, so we get close to the game actually releasing, and
yep. Mm-hmm.
By this time, do you have the Elzra name?
Well, the first edition was published under the Sands of Time Games brand.
I didn't even know that. Is that your guys' company and you self-published? You just used a different brand at the time, or is that someone else that published you?
No, that was us, and it was a registered partnership. It wasn't even a corporate entity at the time, and yeah, we just came up with the name of it. We all unanimously agreed that would be kind of an interesting ring to it, I guess. And that's how it started. So Catacombs first edition and second edition, with the related expansions, all came out under Sands of Time, and then the transition to Elzra was later.
And what is Elzra?
What is Elzra?
Yeah.
For me, it's the name of someone special. So it was propitious in a lot of ways that .com was available. So I took not that was the only factor, the availability of a domain name, but it was I liked that it conjured up a kind of an exotic type flavor, if you like, without being too difficult to spell or too complicated. So I felt that it would be sort of a very global type word for a global audience.
To me, when I see the name, it seems incredibly evocative, yet I can't place exactly what it evokes. It's a name that I'm attracted to, and immediately I think it's leads to someone's first name, like who's Elzra? Elzra surely is the person that is running the company. Elzra West is
Elzra West. That's interesting.
If first edition and second edition are put out by Sands of Time, and then third is Elzra, that gets into some of the interesting things about editions of board games. Why did you feel like you needed a new edition? Was it just you were working on a new print run and decided, well, we can tune up some of the mechanisms in this game? Or was there a more fundamental thing that you wanted to address based off of player reaction, based off of what you'd like the game to become? Why have there been multiple editions of Catacombs up until this point?
Well, that's a fairly encompassing question, and it sort of touches on a number of different things that were happening in our lives at the time. So first of all, with for the purposes of context, I will just suggest that first edition did really quite well in the sense that we did a conservatively small print run, and it sold out very quickly, mainly by word of mouth. So at that point, we had this validation that we had something there. So we said, okay, well, let's put out an expansion set, which we did. And with second edition, we wanted to make some changes to some of the artwork, which we did, and released another expansion as well. But at that point, then we were all sold out for the most part, and there was really this question then of, well, what's next? What are we really going to do? And of course, this was still in a time period before Kickstarter. This would be around 2012. So at this point, what we were going to do was drifting a bit, if you like, because it would have meant another printing and putting up more money again and sort of rolling the dice on another sell-through of that printing. And so there was some equivocation amongst the three of us about what were we going to do with this. And I had got to a point where I was enjoying it and wanted to continue. And ultimately, with third edition, I had some ideas that I wanted to see fulfilled. And there was this propitious timing with some third-party stickers going up on Board Game Geek. And of course, this was submitted by Kwanchai Moriya, and that started the conversation with him. And because the reaction to those stickers was illuminating, and people seemed to really like that fanciful, almost whimsical illustrations that he had done, where we had a more dark, gothic, serious tone. He turned the spectrum right to a more playful reimagining, if you like.
That's exactly the word that I was thinking in my mind, is that is playful. It is inviting to the players, and it's almost laughing along with them to, hey, come over here, check this out, look how cute this is, look how neat this is, don't you want to just play with me and have fun? His artwork is incredible, and I think I'm sure you would agree is instrumental to the further success of the game at this point.
When Kwanchai and I started having that discussion, it didn't move forward very quickly, because ultimately I had to settle what we were going to do regarding Catacombs with my two colleagues. And I'd said to them, well, I'd like to do something with a third edition. And my idea was that if I was going to proceed, then it would be with Kwanchai, and it would be the opportunity to shift the product into this new context and still retain the features that had got us to where we were at that point. And this seemed a logical opportunity for our first Kickstarter campaign. And I said, well, I'd like to run it, and you guys don't have to necessarily take any risk or anything like that. I'm just going to spend this time and invest the resources, if you like, to set up the campaign and to run it and to do all those things. And here's what this will look like, and i.e. meaning like what this third edition could look like, and are you okay with this? And they were fine with it. So they said, yeah, no, let's see what happens. We want to take a step back from the publishing side of things. You can run with this and see what happens.
what about the actual development of the game itself? Because clearly the rules evolve. The core concept is there, but what was the impetus between evolving the rules? Was it you wanted tighter balance? Was it you wanted more accessibility? What was your vision for not just the publication or the look of the game, but what was your vision for the core design of the game moving forward?
Well, there were some things from a production side of things that we wanted to address, some issues that we knew that we could do better. One of those things was having larger game boards, taking it up a notch and having a more expansive play space. That was one of the things that I wanted to address. Another was the barrier wall system to prevent the pieces from falling off of the board. Of course, in Catacombs, you're not penalized for that, but it's just inconvenient if you have to spend half the game hunting around under the sofa for an errant piece that got flicked off the table. And in Catacombs, by the way, you learn pretty quickly that really flicking hard doesn't always necessarily get you the result that you want. It's you come into that almost Zen-like state of control where you can just do it, and it's a lot more precise and a lot more accurate. I'm not, of course, describing myself. I'm describing my brother, because he's fantastic at it. Like he did this thing on camera the other day, and when we were at Dice Tower Con, he was talking about it afterwards. He's like, I hit you right from across the board. He said, that shot was amazing. I'm like, yeah, right on live on camera too. Of course, that would be him, right? Anyway, so those were the kinds of things that we wanted to do. But cards in the original first and second edition of Catacombs, they had a lot of text. And I think with the Skull Staff, with the original Cavern of Soloth, we were at like 5-point font to describe what this thing did, and there was all this complexity, and it takes the monster off and it puts it in another dimension inside the Skull Staff, and then there was this kind of like little mini physics lecture about how it did that, and it's like, I'm reading this thing, it's like, most people don't care about this, right? We found it interesting, but I'm sure the average player was just hunting for a magnifying glass more than anything. So there was some elements like that were kind of cool, but okay, well, I think we can simplify it and without sacrificing any of the nuance, but at the same time decreasing the language dependence. So these were some of the things, but for me creatively, at the center of it, aside from components and production concerns and rules and making refinements and things like this, is really that I wanted to tell this story of this world. And Kwanchai, for the first printing of third edition, he did a map in the manual of just one small part of it. And as we've released different products, I don't always go into a lot of detail about it, but there's this underlying story that I'm telling. And that comes back to that Game of Thrones type element, if you like, from all those years ago. There's George R.R. Martin is obviously telling this story, and I'm doing the same thing. I just don't have necessarily the same canvas to do it in terms of the amount of text that I can allocate to get it right in front of the player, but there's a lot of very deliberate choices in the way that things are put together, especially as I've taken over more of the creative reins from the foundation that we started with, to kind of bring everything together. And I take the opportunity to go back into some of the past of this particular place and also into the future as well. There's a narrative here about what the sort of the shape of this place, the way it operates, it's the reality of it in a sense, and then also the lives of the people, the characters that exist. What is it that they're doing? And they are all doing things. I just don't necessarily have the opportunity to fill everybody in on all of the little nuances of the backstory. And I don't know
that you should. I mean, this is really fascinating to me, and it's I mean, going back again to when I'm a kid, playing Hero Quest and Battle Masters and Warhammer, you know, seeing all these games that have connective tissue that's vague and somewhat just kind of lingering in the background, and you just uncover little nuggets of connective tissue that brings these together, makes the world seem so much more realized than if everything were much more elaborately spelled out for the player. It allows you to engage with your imagination. And when the details aren't entirely revealed to you, you as the player, the reader, the viewer, you know, whatever medium you're working with, and you get to engage your own creativity and start filling in blanks. And that's where I think games in particular are fantastic at allowing you to enter and immerse yourself in a world in a way that no other medium really allows you to, and that's very cool that you're cognizant of that as you're developing these games.
Yeah, so for example, with the new Catacombs Conquest title, for example, that jumps ahead into the future, into the far future. And this is what I found interesting about that particular title, was that it gave me the opportunity to shine a light forward, in a sense. So there's actually some chapters, in a sense, between where we are right now and getting there. But it allowed us to jump ahead to that and to see what some of the consequences are before, in a sense, a bit of a preview before, you know, what happens in the story.
Right.
So,
well, then let's kind of move on from here. We have a few new games that are coming out or have come out. I mean, Catacombs Conquest was your successful Kickstarter that just happened, so congratulations on that. That's a very cool project of bringing Catacombs to the masses, right? A small form factor game that's at a cheaper price point that kind of introduces people to the concept of Catacombs.
Yeah, that's right. It's a small game, but a big chapter in the Catacombs story. You know, there's a lot in there of myself. You know, it's inspired by, as all of the games are in terms of their backstories, inspired by things that have happened to me, and, you know, life experiences and things of that nature. So it's like I said, it's an interesting opportunity to take something that started life as a fairly sophisticated dexterity dungeon crawl system, and make those tough decisions to say, okay, well, what do we really need to present our dexterity game system in the most efficient manner possible, and keep it very inviting and keep it very straightforward. But at the same time, I think once some of the more experienced players get their hands on it, they're going to realize that there's some new strategic twists that are baked in there that they're going to have the opportunity to explore. Although it is marketed as being a lighter, more casual game, there's definitely, because of that, again, the dexterity element and the card driven style to it that changes things up quite significantly to, say, between Catacombs and Castles, one of our other standalone base games, and the original Catacombs itself.
And when does Catacombs Conquest actually hit stores? I know it was just kickstarted, but you seem like such an efficient operation now that, you know, the turnaround seems like it's happening pretty quick for you.
Well, I hope so. We had some production challenges when it came to Catacombs and Castles. That's for sure. But I'm hoping to. You know, it'll sound ambitious. I'm hoping to have it ready for Christmas, because most of the core development on it is done. All the artwork is done. All the manual is done. We're really just fine tuning it, and I think the main potential delay is just whether I might want to send it to this other factory instead of this one that did Catacombs and Castles. And I've just got to decide from a production scheduling point of view. But I'm hoping that it's going to be ready fairly efficiently. Now, I'm going to eat those words, of course, because there's going to be some kind of disaster that's going to happen, right? I mean, I think the last joke was the neoprene mat factory is going to go up in flames or something, right, taking our entire order with it. So who knows, right? But I'm hoping this particular Kickstarter was run very much towards the end of the process. Like, all the wood is produced already. It's sitting there at the factory. It's done. So we're really just looking to put through the printed material. And I wanted to incorporate, as we always like to do, some of the feedback from our community. And those people, they're very supportive, and we genuinely appreciate it. We take their comments, and I listen to every one of them. And if there's merit to the comment and we feel that we can work it in, we will do that. And there were some good comments that came out for Catacombs Conquest, and we made some adjustments to the product as a result of that input.
So you got Catacombs, which is your more traditional players versus dungeon master dungeon crawl. You have Catacombs Conquest, which is your more, I guess, brawl type of game with a card-based system, a hand of cards, and that's kind of your entry point. And then you have Catacombs and Castles, which is a larger scale team PvP type of game, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And is that releasing here at Gen Con?
It won't release at Gen Con because the shipment...
aforementioned issues?
The shipment just arrived at our warehouse last night. So we're speaking on August 15th. So that was August 14th that the container literally rolled up to the loading dock.
Oh, man, just barely missed it.
So there will be some copies of Catacombs reprint at Gen Con, and the Wyverns expansion at Gen Con as well. But we can't sell Catacombs and Castles because we haven't fulfilled it to our backers yet. And I'm very strict about that. Our backers get it first.
I'm so thankful for people like you. The spirit of Kickstarter and crowdsource funding is very important to me, and the loyalty to the people who helped you along is also very important to me. And I'm thrilled to hear that's also important to you as a publisher, as a designer, and as a gamer, that the people who put their confidence in you and gave you money to support you along the way, that you would honor them by getting them the game first. You're a stand-up guy.
It's just the right thing to do.
Exactly.
First of all, I couldn't do it without them, and I appreciate every single one of our backers, even the ones that I'm sure are irritable with me at the moment because they've had to wait this long. And I get that. I can sit on the other side of the fence and understand where that frustration and resentment comes from. But overall, we attempt to mollify that by being upfront and transparent and respond to everybody's comments on the project page to the best of our ability, so that people can at least be informed about what the status of the project is. We maintain a separate page on our website that shows people what the shipping status is for our various fulfillment centers. And so, again, we do our very best because we do appreciate every one of them that has supported us on this. We really couldn't do it without them. And this is not an organization here where we sort of party along with frivolous things. I don't know really how you would summarize it. We did that Kickstarter. It was very successful, but it was just another day at the office. Of course, there was a sincere appreciation, but there was no celebrating or anything like that. We just keep working. Right. That's really literally how it is. We just keep working and to move the product forward. You can't celebrate until all your customers have it in their hands. That's, raising the money is only one fraction of the whole process. Getting it to the customer, the end user, is the key part. And then, of course, the broader release, once those early adopters have been satisfied.
In your career in this hobby, in this industry, thus far, your legacy is Catacombs and the subsequent interpretations of this dexterity system. And I'm wondering if that this is the path that you'd like to continue going down, evolving and refining Catacombs and maybe other themed dexterity games, or do you foresee yourself changing and publishing other types of games, designing other types of games? Is there room for Elzra to start publishing other people's designs that may be completely different than anything that people have seen at this point?
So that's a fairly multifaceted question. So the answer is that we will continue to develop Catacombs and the underlying dexterity game system. We will also publish some third-party designs. We don't have a not invented here mentality. If there's a great design out there, we're happy to look at it. We haven't published a third-party design yet, but we do have a couple in the pipeline that are on our roadmap. Some of those designs may come out under the Catacombs branding, but it will always be very clear that the mechanics are different, for example, and were put together by somebody else. So that's the second part, these third-party designs. And then, of course, I would like to be able to publish some different kinds of games that don't necessarily use our dexterity system. There's scope for that too. Ryan has some different ideas, for example, that he's exploring, and if he's got something that seems worth pursuing and that he's feel has been refined enough and he's passionate about, then absolutely I would be looking at that and other people's as well. Like him and I tend to work very well together. So he'll come up with some ideas, I'll come up with some ideas. We collaborate back and forth. So that's probably in the near future, the short term, that would probably be what that would look like. And having something like that in our catalog is important because if you look at shows, for example, like Tabletop, they can't shoot dexterity games. They've said it's a problematic type of game for them to produce. So having something that doesn't fall under that particular rubric would be useful. The closest thing that we have right now is the upcoming card game, which is the Catacombs Monster Pit, Ryan's original concept for a trick-taking kind of card game. It's the way he explains it, but of course there's some interesting, innovative elements that he came up with for it, which we've been refining now for the last couple of years, back and forth.
Well, the one last thing that I wanted to ask about is like a tangible piece of advice, because at this point, you, as well as Ryan and Mark, are among the most accomplished dexterity game designers at this point in the industry. You certainly have pushed the boundaries of what a dexterity game could be, and you continue to do so. So is there some element of designing dexterity games that is unique into that type of game that people wouldn't necessarily think about, that maybe you wish you had been thinking about when you guys first set out on designing, what was it, Nudging Quest
Yeah,
back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day. Yeah, I think it's difficult to distill a specific piece of advice for someone as it related to the creation of Catacombs. Because, and I say that because it's been such a unique product. It's very difficult to predict these, in a sense, lightning in a bottle kind of products. These ones that come out and they immediately excite people's imaginations, right, and their desire to play it. We certainly didn't think that was going to be the case when we were putting it together. So our objective at the beginning was not to say, oh yeah, we're going to create some kind of blockbuster kind of game here. That it was very much on a more modest scale. Let's just publish something to show people that, and really more importantly, to show ourselves that in fact we could do this and express this idea and do something interesting and innovative and all of that. Like I said, when we first started, we really didn't think that we were making a dexterity game. There weren't really very many of them to begin with. In fact, the only one that we were really familiar with was Pitch Car, and there was a couple of them that were kind of like sports type ones. Mm-hmm. Maybe was it Super Footy or something like that? Was that one of them? I don't know. Anyway, there were that was it, and we didn't own any of them. Starting with very much a blank slate. The only thing that we really had at the beginning was, and I don't take any credit for this, was Ryan and Mark had much more knowledge about Dungeons and Dragons, for example, than I did. So when they were choosing some of the monsters, for example, in those early days, it was like, well, that guy was in D&D, and he was kind of cool, and players liked him from D&D. That's where the gelatinous cube came from. I'd never heard of a gelatinous cube personally. I didn't know what that was, but I was told that, and that's not to say I didn't play fantasy video games or whatever when I was growing up, but in terms of like that Dungeons and Dragons specific kind of creature, that was Ryan. He knew about the gelatinous cube, and he said that the players really like those. They're very popular. Same thing with the owlbear. He knew about owlbears and things of that nature. I wasn't personally familiar with those, so that was all him, that he knew about those creatures. When I took it over, I had a different filter, if you like, a different background, and I wanted to have it where it went in a completely different direction, away from some of those more prototypical Dungeons and Dragons type monsters. But to come back to the original question, I think distilling a piece of advice is difficult, because replicating something like this is hard. You get people ask you, just in terms of anything that you've had any kind of modicum of success with, like, well, how did you do it? And the internet is full of these kinds of lists. Well, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, wiki how, sure. The whole thing, right? And it really sort of just, in this particular case, grew very much just out of organic inspiration and perseverance, really, more than anything. So I think that's the main piece of advice, if I really had to crystallize it, would be, if you have an idea, where there's a will, there's a way, and just stick with it, persevere with it, push forward with it. Just don't give up. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you just can't give up with it. It's going to be very difficult. It will challenge you in ways that you can't imagine, but that's part of where a lot of that personal growth comes from, in exploring how to do any new thing. And if you feel that the passion's there and the interest is there, then that maybe you found something in your life path that you feel that you can persevere with and stick with. If you find yourself with the sort of the tree wilting a bit and sort of saying, well, like, if we'd rather do something else, well, don't wait. We've got this one life in front of us here. Go and choose and do something else and persevere at that.
I can't imagine you putting that any better. The grit, the drive, the passion, the follow through, and putting up with pursuing something that you really love. That is fantastic. And I've really appreciated having you on, Aron. I'm very much looking forward to seeing Catacombs as it evolves and develops over time. I could probably talk to you about a million other things, but you have a convention to get ready for. So thank you so much for coming on the Cardboard Herald, Aron.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and if you ever want me to come on again, it'd be my pleasure. It wouldn't be a problem at all. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Alright everyone, thank you so much for listening to the Cardboard Herald. Just a couple of things before I let you go here. I wanted to mention that if you wanted your own chance to talk with Aron of Elzra Games, who you just listened to, at a convention, he will be at the inaugural Shut Up and Sit Down convention in Vancouver in October and the inaugural PAX Unplugged in Philadelphia this November. He was super open and willing to talk about anything when I saw him at Dice Tower Con, and I'm sure that he'd be willing to do the same for you. Check out Catacombs if you get a chance. It is super cool, and a convention is a great way to actually see the thing in action, to flick those discs and feel how it works. I guarantee you, if not in love, you will at least be intrigued. It is a very cool game. I also wanted to mention that you can continue to support the Cardboard Herald by going onto YouTube and finding our much neglected YouTube channel, because we've hardly posted any videos on there, at least in the last long while. But at long last, I am now committed to doing a YouTube series. I've been mentioning this for a while. I've been experimenting with different formats in order to get something consistent that I can put out there, and I think I've discovered what will work for me. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be a little rough at first, but you can finally find the Cardboard Cutouts episode 1 up there, and I'm going to spend the next couple of months trying to get one of these out every 2 to 3 weeks, crossing my fingers that I can get it every 2 weeks. It is a repeatable format where I do recommendations of games based off of a particular theme. I am learning entirely how to video edit all myself with some help of some friends who are willing to give me advice and guidance along the way. And if you want to contribute to that, I'm going to need lots of photos and little videos of games, which will save me a huge amount of time. Get in touch with me at cardboardherald@gmail.com if you are willing to be a little picture monkey for me, to take pictures of your games that I'm going to be doing recommendations of. Nice, pretty, beautiful pictures, and you'll get credit in the videos. Then I also wanted to mention that if you haven't checked it out, we have our sister podcast channel, which is the Cardboard Herald Reviews, audio versions of our written reviews. We've been getting a lot of good response to that, but I want to spread the word. The thing that you can do to help us out the most is to go on to iTunes and click the little star button to give us lots of stars if you like us. Give us a review would be even better on both of our channels. That means so much. It brings attention, it brings new listenership, it brings more discussion about the podcast, which ultimately is going to lead to better content with more access to all kinds of guests. Plus, maybe I'll do a little happy dance and post that on the YouTube channel to get some new listenership. Wouldn't you like that? I'll do it for you. Thanks everyone for listening. I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald, and you keep on gaming.